This is also a world premiere. Forrester's Don't Delegate AI report, commissioned by Zycus, is being publicly presented for the very first time. It's an honest, data-backed picture of what AI adoption really looks like on the ground. And it lands hard on a single question. Who in your organization is actually accountable for AI strategy? Jeffrey Rajamani is a senior analyst at Forrester, where he covers sourcing and procurement technology. Jeffrey has spent his career advising Global 2000 companies on technology strategy. And the report he's about to share is one of the most pointed pieces of analyst research published on this topic this year. Jeffrey, the stage is yours.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining from. Welcome to the session. I hope you're doing well today. When you talk about Gen AI in procurement, at the risk of stating the obvious, the pace of change, what we see in the market, has never been this faster. And no wonder this pace is accelerating. Just about 2 years ago, most organizations have barely absorbed the implications of generative AI. The tech spend on AI servers, as you see there almost right at the bottom, has increased, catapulted, I should say, from 10% to 26%. So this AI, the wave of AI, has hit the next wave of digitalization. So now Agentic AI, autonomous decisioning, increasing sophisticated back-end automation, all this is kind of in play. The challenge is no longer identifying new technology, it's separating genuine value from noise, and actually also turning blind optimism, or rather fear, into business outcomes. Now, the blatant truth, despite all the hype, technology is evolving far quicker than most organizations' ability to adapt. So the underlying principles, of transformation may remain constant. There is the hype. Sustainable transformation is rooted in people, in process, in data, and in technology, right? So in that order, you cannot automate dysfunctions. So nor can you hire your way out of broken processes. Real value comes from aligning behind measurable outcomes first, and then enabling the organization to deliver at scale. Now, which brings procurement at center stage. Procurement is at an inflection point today. Let's get that very clearly. Procurement is changing. The rising tide of digitalization means that core activities associated with procurement functions, sourcing, spend analytics, negotiations, category management, you name it, are becoming increasingly automated and optimized. Now, procurement teams, they are expected to do more with less. There's this kind of been the daily resolve of procurement professionals, category managers, day in and day out since the last several years now. They find themselves facing a plethora of choices. They continue to strive for efficiencies in delivering their core activities. They have to monitor risks, automate them, segmenting of third parties, vendor consolidations. They have to rip up the script and take always bold new approaches to how their procurement function can create value. So moving away from cost to value. Procurement already underwent a sea change around the turn of the millennium. So the days of paper purchase orders, you might remember, Excel spreadsheets are all over. Today, procurement is moving away from a reactive, tactical backroom function to a strategic center of fulcrum of category and supplier management. In the next few years, if I were to put on my thinking hat on, procurement leaders will need to execute another transformation of comparable magnitude. Now, taking the functions beyond sourcing, beyond negotiation, beyond tail spend management, to make procurement function an embodiment and enabler of the broader organization's strategic ambitions. And that's why we keep hearing a seat at the table for procurement. Well, Organizations that have embraced agile, tech-enabled operating models, I speak to a lot of companies day in and day out, they are outperforming their peers, right? Those that have not, I call them the laggards, struggling to keep pace, they will face an existential challenge, right? That's why I call it's the moment of reckoning. But procurement is at this cusp of that disruptive shift to be the catalyst for enterprise-wide value creation. That brings me to the role of CPOs. I put a very bold statement here saying CPOs must own agentic AI. Now, what does that mean? Now, most CPOs, when told that they must own AI, they immediately think, about governance committees, budgets, vendor selection, and so on. So, I mean, that in essence is the wrong instinct. If a chief procurement officer does that, that's clearly the wrong door to IT. So what if you do that? You're sending AI back to IT by the back door. But procurement must take the bull by its horns. Owning agentic AI means designing the system of work that agents will operate inside. So that's looking at it not as a project, but a product management skill. You need to define the outcomes, you need to define the scope, the boundaries, and deciding what a machine is allowed to do, what a machine is not allowed to do, and when does a human in the loop come. That's what is owning agentic AI mean. So does the CIO have that ability? Let's accept that no CIO has that context. The CPO has the context, right? There are three decisions every CPO must make now, right? The CPO is, take for example, when was the last time procurement's major transformation happened? Renegotiating supplier tiers, redesigning approvals, and so on. So, in your organizations, can you just think back and say who led that procurement transformation? Was it IT? It was actually procurement. So, if procurement is able to do that, right, then agentic AI and owning agentic AI, the CPO, and it should not be delegated. I was talking just last week to a large insurance company in Germany, and there they said ops and procurement were leading the transformation program in procurement. Okay, as it pertained to procurement transformation, CIO nowhere in picture. Now, when I say three decisions every CPO must take, these are not best practices, but really genuine choices with real trade-offs. You all might have read a report. It says, "Don't delegate AI. Why procurement leaders must personally not surrender AI-driven decisions." If you have not read this, I recommend that you go through this now. Three decisions, I mentioned that. I'll come to that in a bit. The CPOs who treat agentic AI as an IT project will spend this year watching all the leaders run sourcing cycles that you as laggards will not be able to compete at all. Now, imagine those three decisions as three forks in the road, okay? So there are various spots that you need to take. You might be at different inflection points, but important is you need to see where you are, what is applicable to you, and what is the easiest path that you can take. Now, with regard to this study per se, agentic AI is reshaping procurement day in and day out, moving beyond automation towards systems that can autonomously interpret intent. So there's a difference between automation and autonomous. Autonomously interpret intent means it can take decisions even without a human intervention. It can take actions across complex workflows. So amid this greater efficiencies, productivities, and play, the risk for procurement leaders is not over adoption of AI, but rather delegating AI too early. So this book has been very carefully titled that way, Don't Delegate AI, and why you must not surrender AI-driven decisions to someone else in your organization. Now, it appears from the study that the responsibility for procurement's AI vision is still split between IT and procurement. I mean, AI is a much larger play in organizations, so IT does get involved, but creating a structural setup between who sets the strategy and who builds the system, that's very important. 31% are confident in the skills of AI. 69% as I highlighted here, they push their end-to-end AI deployment for faster decisions. So that brings us to another study as opportunity snapshot that we did. We asked what are the key priorities for procurement. So when it comes to AI-driven transformation, procurement leaders are prioritizing foundational capabilities that are required to strengthen their enterprise. Now, alignment between procurement and finance is the top priority, as you can see here. Improving data governance and real-time visibility, strengthening collaboration, then sustainability, ESG, end-to-end deployment, and so on and so forth. There's a clear indication of what an average procurement organization is going through. This study was done across geographies, across industries, only with C-level execs, influencing or directly responsible for procurement. So it's a spot on there. That brings me to the first decision that I promised you I'll talk to you about. Everyone in this meeting today should know, where do I start? Where to start? And when it comes to agentic AI and procurement. So we have been talking about the crawl, walk, and run. Sometimes I did speak in another forum about experimentation, scaling, explosion. There are different ways in which you can look at it, but the question arises, how should you crawl, or how should you start with experimentation? Very important. Well, the instinct, any organization will say, let's let 1,000 flowers bloom. But that's the wrong approach. You can't pilot everywhere. The right move is to go deep in one place. So we call it the team methodology. You know your battles to choose from, and then go deep into the best starting point has 3 salient characteristics. The work should be repetitive in nature, it should be data rich, and the outcome should be measurable. There are a pervasive range of use cases for agentic AI in procurement. So again, just to drive home the point, the work should be repetitive when you start, piloting, should be data rich, and outcome should be measurable. So spend management, supplier onboarding, strategic sourcing, right? Sourcing events, are very good, very clear examples of these in procurement you can start from. These are not simple automations, they're multi-step automations. Yeah, judgment heavy processes, you can keep it aside. Suppliers produce an outcome a human would otherwise spend days on. So tail spend management, that 80-20 rule, I'll talk to that in a bit. Well, most people, say, do we need agentic AI for everything? No, the answer is not real. It's important to know, if a simple deterministic model like a robotic process automation does the job, so be it. So you can have a plethora of models. Choose your battles carefully. Where does agentic AI bring in those values that you want? But agentic AI should not be undermined. I mean, if you take a look at the deterministic model like a robotic process automation, what it does is RPA automates repetitive tasks, is rule-based, deterministic. Generative AI generates new content. You prompt it for answers, it generates new content. Agentic AI, on the other hand, is very important to note that it makes decisions, it adjusts plans, it communicates proactively. So basically, it answers questions, it executes tasks, just as generative AI, but it adapts and learns in real time. It adds reasoning and context awareness, data-driven insights. So that's very important for you to keep an eye on. Now, the second decision that I talked about, after you move from experimentation, how do you govern? That's very important. It could also mean, how do you scale up? Think of it as a product design. Don't think of it as an IT policy. When it comes to IT, the governance is written by IT, is written to prevent things from happening. But the governance designed by a CPO is proactive in nature. On the other hand, it's written to enable the right things at speed. So agentic AI makes those decisions. It doesn't do recommendations. Decisions in real time with real consequences. The governance question is not who approves what the agent is authorized to decide alone, what the agent is not authorized to decide alone, what can it escalate to a human, and how would you know when it's wrong or when is it hallucinating. Now, this requires the CPO to think like a product manager. So once you have the experimentation, where to start from, define the agent's mandate, the escalation triggers, the audit trail. So it's not an IT policy, but it's a product specification. The CPO who writes the specification should own the outcome. Now, the CPO he owns nothing. So be very, very careful of that. So I usually use this parallel to say, think of agentic workflow as a junior hire. Now, each agentic workflow is a junior hire with extraordinary speed and maybe a little less common sense. You would not give that new hire, complete authority, unsupervised authority on day one. Rather, you would wait, watch the first tens and hundreds of decisions that are made, define the scope clearly, adjust it, and then expand the mandate because trust has to be earned. Governance is also that process applied to AI. Again, repeat, trust is key. So this is another study that we did here. Which persona or function leads the AI initiatives in your study is very clear. Responsibility for procurement's AI vision is split between IT and procurement. I already mentioned this. 1/3 of organizations defer their AI vision to IT, creating the structural gap where AI decisions are technology driven. It should not be grounded in procurement workflows. CPOs who are deploying point agents that surface a recommendation on a screen are exposing AI. So they're not embedding it. So that's the reality that we need to keep in mind. Now, leaders do it differently. Agentic, data shows that agentic flows where the agent acts across multiple systems and processes without a human handoff at every step. That's how leaders do it. And if I move to the third step, which is called scaling up, they are, as I said, moving from a pilot to an operating model scenario. Organizations treat a successful agentic pilot as a proof of concept and then try to replicate it. Scaling agentic AI equated to replication. Remember, it should be a redesign. So that's very, very important as the way they see it. Now, when an agent handles sales spend at scale, the procurement team's job changes. Category managers will spend less time on transactional activities. The organization chart may not reflect that. The KPIs may not reflect that. The skill profile also may not reflect that. The CPO who scales agentic AI simultaneously redesigns the operating model. Okay, so this is a strategic transformation. Definitely, to drive home my point, it's not a technology rollout. It's exactly why a CIO cannot lead it. Okay, now the CPO who scales agentic AI has to redesign that operating model. Now, as I mentioned earlier, treat it as a strategic transformation, definitely not as a technology rollout. So, which brings me almost to the end of my speech. Well, you need to kind of choose your battles carefully. If there is one idea that you can take today, saying that you will implement it in your organizations, that would be a great takeaway from today's session. Now, I'm giving you a menu of 4 concrete first moves that you could make in your organizations. You can't boil the ocean. You need to take as your organization takes. Let's identify your beachhead. Okay, one process where an agentic flow return is measurable, let's say in a matter of 3 months or so. Take that as a challenge. Say one agentic flow process in your organizations, in your area of remit. Name it, give the session. Second is write down the mandates. draft a one-page scope. What does it mean that the agent can do, what the agent should not do, when should it bring a human in the loop and escalate it to a human? That's one way of looking at it. Okay, that's one way of also doing it before you build anything and scaling up. Taking the governance, go to your organizations and say, is the CIO getting involved in everything? Claim the governance. Okay, tell your CIO this week that the CPO and the category managers and everyone in procurement will own the agent specifications. We will own the infrastructure, but we will own the AI. And lastly, use this study that we did. We have all the findings there. Benchmark yourself against that. Forrester's Don't Delegate AI to audit where your organization sits, right, in these structural gaps. AI strategy, ownership, excellence, and so on. And CPO's role there is phenomenal. Which brings me to my final point. The CPO who owns the AI definitely will have friction. They will have friction with the other stakeholders in the organization, with IT, with finance, maybe with their own teams. Now, well, that's not a sign that something is wrong. That's really a sign that he's moving fast enough to matter. Thank you.
Jeffrey, thank you. That was as direct and as useful a piece of analyst guidance as I've heard this year. 2 questions from the chat that I'd like to put to you, though. Jeffrey, you framed governance as a product specification. The CPO defines what the agent can decide, what it escalates, and how you know when it's wrong. When the agent gets it wrong at scale, who is actually accountable? And has the answer to that question changed how any organization you've worked with has actually designed their governance?
That's an excellent question. See, the word accountable is very clear. I mean, you can't make a system accountable. You can't make an agent accountable. I was reading a book the other day when I was on my flight, actually. Corporate governance and legal departments, legal frameworks do not recognize AI as a legal person. So AI, the agent, they don't recognize that. So who has to be accountable? The human, the agent, because you cannot be deposed, you cannot fire, you cannot sue an agent, and so on. So accountability, that's why I said the word accountable says a lot. It flows naturally to the human, who's the one who deployed this agent. Now, I usually call this as a mentality. A captain of the ship, whatever the ship is, he may not be steering the ship every single second, right? But they are absolutely accountable if something goes wrong or if some action has to be taken, if the autopilot doesn't work or whatever. So that's the mentality that the CPO should have. So whoever is accountable, in this case, CPO, he becomes accountable if the agent has hallucinated and given wrong results, as a result of which it's put, there have been some losses that have incurred. Accountability definitely is the CPOs. Now, things are a little bit different, how governance has changed from reactive rules to proactive product design. I use the word product a lot in today's talk. It's not the old school governance. Now governance is almost like repairing an aircraft while it's still in motion. So the big shift now is to treat governance as a product specification. So the CPO's job is no longer just to set the policy, but also to hard code the boundaries regularly in terms of autonomy. Now there are various ways in which they could do it. So one is then agent can have full autonomy, but sometimes for strategic purchases, when it comes to purchases in an organizations and so on, you can just say, okay, these purchases are strategic in nature, should go through a human. That's one way of delineating accountability and responsibility. The other one is the segregation of duties that I call it. Now, segregation of duties means that the person who initiates a transaction cannot be the same person who approves it. So entities, so such rules can be brought in together. So AI agent, can negotiate the price. but the order is automatically routed to a human person. So the uh, you can create that segregation of duties way. And the third way, to quickly answer your question, is auditability. I mean, there are modern platforms that help with auditability at real time, so you can change that. So in essence, what I'm saying is governance is not governance that used to be in the olden days. So you can make quick attempts to fix that faster, so that the penalties or any disturbances or losses are not huge. So you can really attack and fix the problems at a much quicker frequency than in the past.
And the second question, if you had to name one thing that will be true about leading procurement organizations in 2028 that isn't true today, specifically because of how they handle agentic AI in the next 18 months, what would it be?
First of all, visibility has to navigate and uh, meander through organizations. When I say visibility, agentic AI and the efficiencies and the effectiveness it provides to organizations. So once procurement organizations know that they're tasked to do more with less, it's a question of time. So I think in 2028, or maybe in the next 18 months, if everyone were to take every procurement organization were to take this seriously, they will get rid of, I showed three use cases in the past, tail spend management, for example, supplier onboarding. These are, manual intensive tasks or task intensive. Take the example of tail spend. The 80-20 rule applies. 80% vendors contribute to 20% of the spend, but just imagine a large enterprise. I was talking to a retail organization not long ago. 20% of a spend for their budgets is a huge amount. And if you can automate that, completely through agentic AI, so autonomous negotiations and autonomous sourcing, if you were to use, they can concentrate really on those 20% of vendors who contribute to 80% of the spend, the strategic vendors, and that frees up their time. So very important is there are some ground rules that people have to do. One is that allow that visibility to meander through the organizations and put on that startup mentality. I want to roll up my sleeve, wet my feet. I want to try it out. Okay. But choose your battles carefully. As I mentioned, you can't just, experiment at scale. No, but you need to go deep, as I said. Fail fast, learn fast, but fix faster. That's the way you need to do. And then have that product mentality. I'm just talking more and more about product. Have that minimum viable product mentality. Look into how it's used, learn, make new hypotheses, build, release, analyze, and then learn. If this is the approach that CPOs take, then I think in 2028, operational procurement would disappear from their purview. They will only be focused on strategy. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Thank you so much once again.